Welcome to the Holston Valley Unitarian Universalist Virtual Church. My name is Rosemary, and though we cannot physically get together this morning, I am glad we can get together through this pre-recorded virtual service. Today is our Soapbox Sunday service, a special tradition for this church in which members and friends of this congregation exercise their right to free speech. The highlight of our morning consists of 5 brave souls who will get up on their soapbox and share with you a topic of importance to them, presented in their own words. The power of words is that a life can be launched with as little as a single phrase, an uplifting word, or an act of kindness.
We light this chalice with compassion for all people of the earth. We light this chalice for equality for all children at their birth. We illuminate to end all hate with peace and freedom for all. All of this plus love and bliss, the greatest joys of all. All of this plus love and bliss, the greatest joys of all.
Amy and Easton will lead us in the hymn, Lift Every Voice and Sing. The words are included on screen, so I encourage you to sing along.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died. Yet with a steady beat of not our weary feet, come to the place for which our Father sighed. We have come over a way that the tears have been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. Out of the gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadow beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land.
We will sing Loving Kindness next. Please hold a light in your heart to dispel the darkness, to honor someone or some event, or to lift up a memory.
May we be filled with love and kindness. May we be one. May we be filled with love and kindness.
Someone once told me you can learn a lot about a person when you read their favorite book. I was skeptical of this, so I read their favorite book and started to understand a little bit. I also realized I'd probably have to read their favorite personal library to understand even more. And then started thinking, what would people learn about me? If there's one thing you know about me, it's that I love books. Ever since elementary school, I've carried a book with me, whether in my bag or in my car. This included days I was directing camp, walking in a parade, or teaching a class. Even though I knew I'd never be able to open it, I needed to know it was nearby. A book brought me comfort and a sense of escape. I knew that regardless of what was happening in real life, I could open a book or put on headphones and escape into a world outside our own. Many times this book was new, so I didn't know what to expect from the characters or the events, and that's exciting. But my favorite books, the ones in my library that I've read over and over, are the ones I return to. I need to be around something familiar. Even then, the characters are just support to what I'm really looking for, which are the stories. The story of vulnerability between characters, the story of hope or belonging, love and honesty, privilege or fear. And these stories mimic ones I see in my friends or family and our communities and the people within. I see them in myself. The book ceases being simply an escape and instead a mirror. They become reminders of who I am and what has happened in my life. So much of me has been influenced by the stories within the books, and if you were to read them, you'd find threads of me in the pages. And then I thought back to my friends and their personal libraries, and what stories or threads I would find there. Even if it wasn't books, it was articles or pictures or stories they shared in person. We've all created our own libraries, whether on accident or purposefully. Some of our books are light and fluffy. Some have a lot of pictures, and some have 1,000 pages. Some are complex or mysterious. What happens when we start looking at the books we read or the stories we share? Where do you see yourself in those pages? Maybe it's okay if a book is more than an escape. Maybe it's okay if stories are more than just words.
The limits of love and peace. We say that love and peace will save the world, but lately I'm not so sure. For on their own, just peace and love have come up short before. Our greatest teachers lived their lives as examples of pure love and trust, but our greatest teachers lost their lives so much sooner than was just. What I mean is that Jesus Christ said to turn the other cheek, and in the end, he was crucified for being meek. MLK said that violence never brings permanent peace. Then they shot him down so that his radical influence would cease. And Gandhi said to practice nonviolence, but in the end, even he was silenced. So is it not our duty, as advocates of love, to stand up and fight to ensure that no other peaceful soul is lost to acts of hatred? Is it not our duty to ensure that life is really treated as sacred? What if peace and love were meant to coincide with just a little anger? Anger on behalf of those who have lost touch with their humanity, given in to misplaced rage and vanity. Inherent worth and dignity remain intact, but how do we convince those who are so lost to come back? Sometimes I think pacifism works until it doesn't, and who are we to tell the oppressed that their bursts of outrage are not representative of their best, when their best was met with systemic denials of their rights to exist? Then of course they grow louder. Then of course they insist. So I say to all of you wonderful hippies at heart, as much as we'd love to stay calm, spread love, and make art, at what point do we break? At what point do we fight back? There is strength in conviction, as much if not more than there is strength in pure muscle and unforgiving brute force. The next time you hear someone well-intending say, if we all just learned to love, it would all just go away, I encourage you to question and ask at what point. At what point do we stand up and draw the line and say, no more?
Climate change is something I've been concerned about my whole life. In fact, I've been going to college to learn about climate change and what I can do to get people to pay attention to it. Climate change itself has so many causes and effects, it would be difficult to cover in 3 minutes. So I've chosen to focus on the main human contributor, pollution. Pollution, like many problems in America, is largely ignored and swept under the rug. This is a problem that many communities are facing today and have been for decades. Communities of color are disproportionately affected by climate change and are more susceptible to environmental injustice, especially pollution from large corporations. Redlined communities in Detroit had a Marathon oil refinery in their community, which produced so much pollution it made the sky orange. This massive amount of air pollution caused a wave of health problems throughout the community, including cancer and asthma. But where does the media tie into all of this? Because the media is motivated by money, the stories they choose to cover need to serve an agenda. Communities that need support will often get a small moment in the spotlight, but news companies are trying to compete with other outlets on the next new headline that needs to come out, and those communities are left behind. Since most people, myself included, want to stay informed, we go to news websites and read articles about the topics we want to learn about. This can be problematic because the companies funding those articles are biased. So what ends up happening is an environmental disaster caused by climate change occurs. A few media sources cover it. People outside that community care about it and spread it. The media moves on to the next big news headline, and the initial wave of supporters die down. The community still has to rebuild, which takes years, and are forgotten about by the majority of the population. This quickly overturning media cycle ends up creating a deluge of information that becomes so overwhelming that you barely want to look at the news at all. Becoming numb and uncaring to the problems of the world is one of the most dangerous mindsets of all. That is how issues like climate change and human rights violations happen, when the lack of empathy becomes the norm. In truth, all these small problems that create the deluge of information are just consequences of the larger problems. Racial justice, climate change, human rights, and the perpetration of a capitalist society are all interconnected. But the media only talks about them as dissected and separate issues, if they cover them at all. When in truth, you can't care about only one of those issues without knowing about all of them. So, where can you go from here? If the media itself is corrupt and biased, where can you get your information? That's a question I cannot fully answer, because something truly unbiased doesn't exist. But I try to source my information from both in-person accounts and scientific papers, and more independent news sources like The Intercept. Simply acknowledging that unbiased sources don't exist allows you to think critically about issues from the beginning. I know these issues, especially climate change, can seem like an insurmountable task to learn about. But turning a blind eye to them would be turning a blind eye to the struggles of the entire world. Take the time to learn and think critically. Maybe start by setting aside an hour each day. Change comes from knowing the biases within ourselves and then using the knowledge we have learned to move forward into action.
Society tells us to focus on what's important, to hurry along, to succeed at all costs. It tells us to focus on the future, not the past. On success, on change, on standing up against racism and homophobia and faulty social constructs. Those things are important, and for most of my life, I've worked to improve myself and the world around me, to create a vision for the future and begin to implement it with all of my energy, or at least as much as I had at the time. I accepted a few years ago, however, that 95% is enough. I studied abroad in Florence while I was in college, and every single student, myself included, focused on not looking like a tourist. But I have to say, each time I saw the Duomo, I still marveled. Every time I remembered that I was immersed in a different culture, I was amazed. And after a while, I let myself be amazed. I looked up at the Duomo as I walked past, never mind if a seller targeted me. I stopped to sketch in front of the statues that I loved, or walked past the yarn store, or wandered the streets aimlessly for the joy of it. It's okay if 5% of your time goes to enjoying the world around you. If it's taken by noticing the clouds, or especially green grass, or a kid who is so excited to have ice cream that he can't contain his joy. It's okay because you and I know that the other 95% is having conversations about injustice and joining rallies and talking to our senators and representatives. It's working and spending time with our family and eating and sleeping and doing all of those daily chores that we try to get done each day. There's no shame in taking those little moments. It doesn't mean that you're a bad person or that you're not focused on your goals. Taking little moments to appreciate the positive bits of the world around you creates breath. It creates the space that we need to remember that the world can be good, that we can grow, that we can become the best version of ourselves. Those moments show what the world was meant to be, joy and bright colors and creation. Look around right now and find something you've forgotten. I see a little blue bell with bright gold stars on it that I'm supposed to ring when I think of my childhood friend, and she has its pair on the other side of the world, so that when I ring it, she can hear me. Find something that gives you that piece of joy and serenity, and actively remember more each day. Appreciate the seemingly mundane. Be a tourist.
The very first phrase of the First Amendment to the Constitution states, quote, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof," end quote. There are organizations that exercise legal action to keep church and state separate, including the ACLU and FFRF, the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Some argue that institutions need not be separate if there's no explicit preference shown, a view called accommodationism, generally supported by evangelical groups, including Christian Coalition and ADF, Alliance Defending Freedom. While these issues are frequently debated in court, many resources are directed to national politics to explicitly encode religious ideology into legislation. These include advocates against social justice, which are often deceptively named quasi-Christian groups like Focus on the Family, which has an anti-LGBTQ platform. A direct threat to the First Amendment are attempts to allow churches to participate in politics. Churches are nonprofit 501c3 organizations that are prohibited from participation in political campaigns by the Johnson Amendment. FFRF settled a lawsuit with the IRS in 2014 alleging lax enforcement, and a resulting IRS investigation found 99 churches marked for, quote, high priority examination. In the 2010s, the ADF tried to challenge the Johnson Amendment through the Pulpit Freedom Initiative, And in 2017, the House of Representatives passed a repeal that did not make it to law. Repeal of the Johnson Amendment was a Trump campaign promise, and he claimed to deliver at the signing of an executive order. FFRF sued Trump in 2017, and his lawyers admitted in court, quote, "The order does not exempt religious organizations from the restrictions on political campaign activity," end quote. These efforts are intended to create less transparent, tax-advantaged super PACs. As Americans, we should be concerned this would completely undermine the First Amendment, and as UU members, we should recognize the potential damage to our advocacy for social justice and religious tolerance. Lest we think infringement is not a Tennessee problem, let me remind you of a notable example among many. In 2016, then-Governor Bill Haslam had to veto a bill that passed our state legislature to make the Bible Tennessee's state book. It is better for both church and state if they are functionally separate, and when an issue of moral concern in public policy surfaces, the debate should be resolved on its merits, not on adherence to a particular creed.
Our time together is nearly finished, our resolve strengthened for work that is not done. To get up on my own soapbox, I remind you that there are still thousands of children separated from their families, packed together in cages without basic sanitation, safety, or security. In the United States, amidst a pandemic. My heart grieves, but there is room for hope with courts ordering these children be released. Even so, I beg you to keep pressure on your representatives to quickly follow through, to not forget. Every child has a right to safety, protection, and a future. Keep urging elected officials to do the right thing by these children now. Please help me close this service now as we extinguish the chalice. Safety and security don't just happen. They are the result of collective consensus and public investment. We owe our children, the most vulnerable citizens in our society, a life free of violence and fear. Nelson Mandela. Thank you to our soapbox participants, Charlie, Lily, Sarah, Lenore, and Eva. Thank you to our musicians and to our tech producers. We will post another virtual church service next Sunday, July 12th, and that service features a guest, Sheila Ennis, on the bent-over woman, the bees, and the virus. Please remember that our services are recorded in advance, so sometimes events move forward without us. However, you can find up-to-date information on local events, social justice issues, inspiration, and content for all ages on our Facebook page. Feel free to join virtual coffee hour after this service. The link is in the chat next to this service video. For our postlude, we are gifted with John Mellencamp's Freedom of Speech, performed by Amy, Linda, and Wendy.
Freedom of speech, freedom to say, freedom to think, this is my lucky day. Freedom that we all can be kings. Freedom is yours, freedom is mine, freedom of speech so I can write down these lines. If you and I agree, hold out your hand to me. We will share our freedoms with our friends and family. Freedom of speech, freedom to say, freedom to think, this is my lucky day. Freedom of thought, freedom of dreams, freedom to believe that we all can be kings. We can take our thoughts so many ways. If your thoughts are different, well, I think that's okay. We should all try to keep the golden rule and cherish our freedoms in our home and in our school. Freedom of speech, freedom to say, freedom to think, this is my lucky day. Freedom of thought, freedom of dreams, freedom to believe that we all can be kings.